Hello and welcome everybody. I on my screen can't see all of you, but I'm sure you're there. So for starters, we do like to acknowledge that we are that the ancestral and unceded territories of all the Indigenous people that call this land home. As well, I just maybe want us to think about we're about to launch into an hour and a half of conversations that talk about the commodification of seeds. And a lot of the Indigenous people we work with across the country and the world do not think of these things as commodities. They think of them as ancestors. And I know that in our hearts and the people presenting here, you probably really understand that as well. And I just welcome us to think about that before the webinar and maybe think about it after the webinar as well, and maybe during the webinar. With that, I'm going to pass it on to, I believe, Hugo to do some introductions.
Thanks, David. I don't think you had the chance to introduce yourself. Do you want to say a few words about yourself, David?
Yeah, my name's David Katzel. I'm the Bauta representative in British Columbia, and it's just getting over a cold and slightly lower brain capacity today, so just want to put that out there. And I'm really looking forward to hearing the content of this webinar. So
Thanks, David. So David is all the way on the West Coast. I'm based in Montreal, Quebec, so I'm the regional Bauta Quebec coordinator. And I'm really excited about the conversation that we're going to have today. We hosted with Bauta a similar webinar 2 years ago because we think that contract seed production is really a great strategy, a great leverage to build more resilient vegetable seed systems across Canada. And so today we brought in some complementary perspectives on contract seed production. So for those who are new to this language, contract seed production is to supply retail seed companies who then sell to farmers and to gardeners. And so the three perspectives that we're going to have today is one is coming from Jenny Fortier from Northern Wildflowers in Northern Ontario, and she's going to share a bit of a unique perspective on the needs for wildflower contract seed production. She's going to share this from as a contract grower, and as a buyer. We also have Marie-Claude Comeau, who's based in Centre du Québec in Monceau, who is specialized in organic contract seed production. So her whole business model is to supply retail seed companies in Canada. And then we're lucky to have Edmund Frost from Virginia and Heron Breen from Maine, who are two colleagues on the south of the border who are involved in the Seed Workers Organizing Group, a group of seed growers who are bringing forward really interesting issues around risk management, around cost of production, around self-organizing on the seed production side. So I'm providing a bit of a landscape of what we're going to discuss today. And without further ado, I'm going to have Jenny share her screen and starting with her presentation. Once all the presenters have about 15-20 minutes each, and then we're gonna open it up to a Q&A.
Thank you for having me. Nice to meet you all. I see some familiar faces and some familiar names. Vous pouvez aussi me demander des questions en français s'il y a un peu de temps pour les questions. I am going to deliver my presentation in English. I'm a little more comfortable in English, but if you'd like to ask your question in French, I'm happy to answer you if that's your preferred language. So a little bit about me. I'm in Sudbury in beautiful Northern Ontario. I founded Northern Wildflowers in 2012, and I'll get into that a little bit more to help everyone understand a bit of where I'm coming from. I'm not a farmer by background, or I didn't grow up on a farm. I'm an ecologist by education, and so I'm sort of an ecologist turned farmer. So farming is still, even though we've been at this for almost 13 years, it's still new to us. And the contract growing is also new to us as a grower and a buyer. So I'm going to share with you a little bit of what we're up to, some of the relationships that we're building as well. So get started. There we go. Okay, so Northern Wildflowers is really about creating pollinator habitat. So we really specialize in native wildflower seed. That's where we started, and that's the space where we mostly play. And as we've kind of matured in our journey, we've also added on the mission of supporting Canadian farmers. As we got to know the seed world, we realized, there's such a lack of Canadian grown product out there. When you're looking at seeds, so much of it on our store shelves comes from Asia and South America. And that was, something that really wasn't sitting well with us. So we added to our mission this goal of supporting more Canadian farmers rather than just the products that come from our farms. So we added a line of vegetable seeds 2 years ago. So we're, as I mentioned, we produce seed on our farm, we buy seed, and we also contract grow seed for others. We have contract growers, we have contract wild seed collectors. So we're in a lot of different spaces, and we're often sort of on both sides of the table. And we've got, contract growers almost across the country now. So that's all great. We sell on our website, we sell bulk seed to restoration practitioners, and we also have a retailer program, so a seed rack program that ends up at garden centers. So our Northern Wildflowers line, as I mentioned, is the Wildflowers. We have over 50 varieties that we offer on that line. And then the cut leaf line is our veggies, and that's exclusively grown by small Canadian farmers. We work with ecological farmers. We don't need them to be organic, but we do ask that they're following ecological practices. So some things that for us as a grower we've realized are really important is the forming of long-term relationships and multi-year contracts. I'll chat a little bit more about what it looks like to grow native wildflowers as a seed crop, but the lifetime required to get this crop to seed is quite long. So these long-term relationships where there's some assurance of a continued relationship are really important because it's a really hard to predict kind of market. So we've learned as a grower that that's really important. So we make sure that we are considering that when we work with when we're a buyer as well. We also know as a grower that yields are not always perfect. It can be every year is different. Every seed crop is different. Every harvest is different. So we have learned that, flexibility is really important for us when we sell seed. And also we understand that it's important for our growers. And then honest communication about how a crop is doing. If it looks like the yield is going to be good or not good, we make sure that there's, some communication happening throughout the season to make sure everybody sort of knows what's happening. As a buyer, some things, if you're considering contract growing, some things that are important to us is because we are selling these products in so many different avenues, there's a large upfront investment in creating packaging and product listings and manufacturing the packaging that we really like for our growers to grow the same crops for a few years at least. Because if we introduce a new cucumber and we invest all that time in, designing the packaging, manufacturing it, creating product listings for all of the different avenues where we sell it, and then we don't have that the next year, that investment is a little, it's kind of a shame. So we do like to see the same crops for a few years, and we discuss that with all of our growers. I mentioned before, we don't require organic certification. We've learned as a farmer ourselves that it can be quite cost prohibitive, especially to a new farmer. It's a real investment to become organic certified. So we like to have the peace of mind that our growers are using ecological farming practices, but we don't require organic certification. Another really important factor is that the seed arrives to us on the date we agree to. So if you're thinking about contract growing, keep that in mind, because there's this whole series of things that comes after that date. It's all this very time sensitive sort of process that happens where customers want to buy their seeds in January, and we usually get them in December. So we've got to get everything packaged and ready in a really short amount of time so that we can get seeds out there when people want to buy them. So that part of the process is pretty time sensitive. And so that's something to keep in mind if you're looking at this as a new revenue stream. So some other things we find when we work with new growers, they can sometimes feel a little intimidated. But keep in mind, there's so many places to find seed sourced from international markets that if a seed house is looking to work with you, it's because they're on a mission to support Canadian farming. Like it's deliberate. It's not by accident, because there's, a whole suite of different places, different brokers that seed can be sourced from international markets. And so if a company is choosing to go with Canadian producers, they've got a value added sort of mission as well, just like you. So you're in, most situations kind of coming from a very similar place. Um, a lot of new growers are intimidated by seed cleaning and germination testing, but for us and for a lot of other seed houses, we can take on the cleaning and the germ testing for you if those parts of the process are intimidating. If you just want to get started and just grow things and see how that goes, but the rest is just you're not ready to invest yet, keep in mind a lot of time your buyer may do that for you, may offer to do that for you. We the last sort of time that we can have updates to our crops and whatever is as late as August. So there's a lot of flexibility, at least with some seed houses, to say, this crop is not doing well, let's take it out of there, or this crop failed, or something funky is happening. So there is some flexibility, at least with how we've done things. We also have yet to turn down a lot. We at times have had lots where the yields are lower. As long as it's enough that we're not losing money on the packaging we're buying for it, then we'll still take it. And some growers really worry about seed quality when they're starting up. What if the quality, the germ rates are below what they're supposed to be? In our experience, usually that just means the seed needs to be cleaned a bit more. Usually there's a bit of dead seed left in that lot that's bringing your germ rates down. And then we'll just give it another clean with our equipment. And that always solves the problem, at least for us so far, knock on wood. So it's intimidating, but it's not that intimidating. There's a lot of folks like us who will work closely with you to make sure that, this is a good experience. So the main thing I wanted to chat about is really that there's this major need for more farmers growing native wildflower seeds. So we have had great success onboarding growers to grow our vegetables for us. And that's, that line is great, but we also really need more growers to grow perennial wildflowers. In Canada, same thing's happening in the US. There's pretty lofty restoration and habitat revegetation goals that have been made in Canada. We have this 30% land mass protected or restored by 2030 goal. And we need a lot of seed to get there, and we don't have it. We don't have enough seed. So enough of this native wildflower, native grass, native trees, native shrubs, they're all needed big time. So we work closely with growers, and we always try to convince them, like, do you want to grow some wildflowers? Do you want to try? And so there's really a need for more farmers growing these crops. A little bit about what that looks like. So they're perennial crops, which has some pros and cons. So what that means is that often the process to get to viable seed can take 2 to 3 years. So it's an upfront investment for sure, but you'll have a productive crop for several years after that. So it's almost like having, looking at a cycle more like an orchard for a lot of crops. We have some varieties that produce seed for 20 years before that plant dies. So it's a little different, but There's lots of other benefits too to growing wildflowers. We have a lot of farmers who come to us and say, like, I'd like to buy some seed to establish a pollinator strip on my farm. And I always tell them, if you're willing to grow a strip of one variety, that can also be an income stream for you. Turn that strip into a production plot, and you can sell that seed and sort of benefit both ways. There is some funding available depending where you are. I think this is OSEA, might be Ontario, but there is some funding available right now for establishing, permanent crops like some native grasses and some native forbs. It's a cap per acre that's available right now, but there are different programs that come out here and there to support in those costs. Other benefits is having an area with native wildflowers creates pollinator habitat, but you're also contributing to the integrated pest management plan on your farm. So those plants act as, hubs for a lot of the predatory insects you want to help control aphids and caterpillars and all these things. So having wildflowers on your farm will increase your yield of other things. It'll increase your pollination. It'll decrease your pest pressure. So there's lots of other really great benefits. A lot of native wildflowers have a great price per kilo in seed. So it can be, a large investment up front, but the price for them is quite good usually, especially if you get into a really rare variety. There's a lot of varieties out there that no one is growing. And if a brave farmer decides to try a few of them, it could be really it's an experiment, but it could be really beneficial. And then we provide guidance and stock seed. Was that my 5-minute warning? Is that what that was?
Yep, that's right.
Oh, thank you. Okay.
Awesome, no worries.
And then that's it. So I'm done. 5 minutes ahead of time. But these are my coordinates for anyone who wants to reach out and discuss. We're happy to guide or support any way we can because we really want to see more folks, producing things in Canada and contributing to a supply chain that's here, in our country for whether it's home gardeners or restoration practitioners. There's a need kind of all around. So
Thank you, Jenny. It's so great to learn more about wildflowers because this is a bit off our radar with a sea change in Bauta since we work specifically on vegetables and on grains. So it's great to know that it's an ecological opportunity, an economic opportunity for farmers as well. So and I think I recognize some of the farmers on this on your slideshow, like Teprine and
yeah.
Marie-Claude with her 2 horses. So Cassie asks if how much land do you find people typically start when it comes to native seed contract growing? He says he has access to about 1.5 acres of land and was wondering if this was a viable path on that scale. So that was his first question. And I think there's a second question coming in. Where can we find out more about figuring out the financial viability of growing native seeds? For example, prices per kilo for different varieties. So one is on land, the size of land, and the other on price per kilo for different varieties. Do you want to answer these questions, Jenny?
Sure. Sorry, I just froze up for a second there.
Looks like Jenny might have froze. I wonder if there's any other
First question was whether, oh, here we go. I turned off my camera, so that might help. So was that the question?
Yeah.
Is the 1.5 acres sufficient? Yeah.
Yeah, the
Okay,
question
sorry,
is how much land do you find people typically start with when they're growing native seed on contract?
Right. Yeah. Yes. So it varies. We don't recommend, we have growers across the board. Some of them have huge farms. Some of them have small hobby farms. 1.5 acres is sufficient. I would say just with isolation distances, you would probably just want to start with a couple of crops. But you are growing these things pretty densely when you're growing, just like if you were growing like tomatoes or whatever. So our plots that we use are 200 feet by 40 feet. So we're not growing on an acre scale, we're growing in a plot scale. So 1.5 acres is sufficient. We don't recommend, we have a lot of home gardeners who reach out to us and we're just like, that's, you probably don't have enough room, but 1.5 acres is more than enough space. You wouldn't be growing native grasses. That's sort of something you want to do on a really large scale, but native wildflowers, that's more than enough space. Yeah.
And I imagine if farmers have questions about price per kilo, they can just reach out to you and kind of have that conversation with you. And is that right, Jenny?
Yes, yeah. There's no standard price per kilo across the board. It varies for every crop. And it varies across years depending on supply. Native wildflowers are still such a specialty crop that there's not a huge consensus on pricing. So it's really about, what did it cost you on your farm? There's no commodity pricing for that space. Which can be nice because if you have, a terrible year, you can still be compensated fairly for it because it is such a niche crop.
And one of your growers, we mentioned her, is Marie-Claude, a good friend of mine. And so I'm happy she's joining us this afternoon. And I'm going to invite Marie-Claude to share her screen. And Marie-Claude is somebody we invited at the last seed contract production webinar. And this time around, I asked her how has her business evolved over the past few years, and to give us a bit of a step back, a bit of a multi-year perspective on how her business is evolving, the type of production she does. Yeah, if you just want to put your full slideshow. Thank you, Marie-Claude. À toi la parole.
Yes, so I'm going to start with a brief overview of the farm, and then I'm going to try to talk a little bit more in detail about marketing, the marketing aspect of growing seeds on contract, and then I also want to elaborate a little bit on the different threats and opportunities that I'm being faced with right now. This is my fifth year of growing seeds on contract, so things have evolved since 2019. So maybe I should start with telling you a little bit about myself. My name is Marie-Claude. I am the owner of La Radicule, which is an organic seed production farm located in Monceau in Quebec. I started the farm in 2019. So this is my fifth year growing seeds on, we're wrapping up the fifth year right now and already thinking about the sixth. So that's great. I learned to grow seeds at Tournesol Farm under the mentorship of Dan Brisebois. And this is really where I got my bearings in this seed market. This is when I saw the business opportunity of growing seeds on contract. And that's when I decided to write my business plan and crunch the numbers and try to figure out if this would be a profitable business. On paper, it seemed to be profitable, and it turns out after 5 years that I can say that it is profitable. I do make a living growing seeds on contract. This is the only thing I sell on the farm. This is the only revenue stream that we have. yeah, so fifth year, my background, I have a diploma in ornamental horticulture as well. But yeah, basically the first 3 years I was on rented land. So when you start a farm, you're always wondering, oh, is it, better to own, better to rent? In my case, it was better to rent while I was preparing some ground at the place that I bought last in 2022. Yeah, so right now it's the second year growing on the farm here that I own with my partner Matthias. Yeah, so right, and it's a big difference growing crops on the land, some land that you own. You're really able to invest more in infrastructures and drainage and irrigation systems. We're still it's only the second year, so we're still trying to get to know the soil. One of the challenges I'm having this year is that I'm growing on a very sandy sand, so fertility is pretty low. So it's a little bit challenging to adapt yields. Like, I'm used to much higher yields, and 2 years in a row now my yields are a little bit more on the low side. So it's like I'm trying to adapt to that a little bit. As Hugo mentioned, I have a team of horses. So that's another pretty unique aspect of the farm, is that we cultivate the land using horses. I used to have 2 mares. Right now I'm down to 1, and that's also been a little bit challenging because as good as she is, as willing as she is, she cannot handle as much as a team of horses. And so for weedy fields, it's proving to be quite the challenge. And so I've had to use the tractor a little bit more than I would like. But I think, yeah, compromising is always, the key to success. And so right now it's more like a mixed powered operation, mainly using horses, but also using the tractor for handling and moving heavy stuff around. So yeah, last thing I wanted to tell you, so that you have an idea of what the farm is like, is the scale. So this year I'm growing seeds on 1.5 acres. In the past, I've went up to 3 acres of 3 acres of seed production, and I lost control a little bit. It's always another challenge trying to figure out what your scale is. And 3 acres turned out to be probably a little too much. I find that 1.5 acres is, at this point in my life, feels comfortable. And so, yeah, growing seeds on 1.5 acres. The land is bigger. We have 12 acres, so we're able to do a nice crop rotation, and also we grow hay for the horses. The team this year is, well, the season is almost over. So the team was me working part-time 3 days a week. And then Matthias, my partner, in the spring was almost full-time. We had Jean-David and Mireille part-time, 2 days a week, more or less. So it really depends, like the demand, the season, it fluctuates a lot, the tasks. And so in the spring we need more people, in the fall we need more people, but then in July it's super quiet. So I'm even able to take vacation, which is nice. I had a baby last winter, so that's why I'm more part-time this year. So yeah, I would say that this year it was probably a person and a half, like the equivalent of a person and a half for 1.5 acres, just to give you a rough idea of the scale. I have about 10 to 12 clients that I sell seeds to. These clients are in Ontario, Quebec, and the northeast of the United States. Sorry, my baby's waking up and daddy's on duty, but daddy's on the phone. Okay. Yeah, so 10 to 12 clients. So I want to talk a little bit more now about marketing. These 10 to 12 clients are, I would say, on the smaller side of seed companies. For example, I wouldn't accept a contract with William Dam, for example, because their scale is too big and the price that they would be offering per kilo would be too low for me to be profitable at my scale. Also, the contracts would probably be too big, like too many kilos, so that I would probably have enough space. But then if I start growing seeds on 5 acres, then I have to employ people. And, it's a whole other, like 3 acres last year was like, we did it, but it was just like, there were a lot of bottlenecks. So we tried it, but yeah. So when you're looking for clients, you want to make sure that this client can offer you a contract that fits your scale, but also a price that fits your scale as well. I started over the last years, I changed a little bit the way I approach contracts. When I started, it was better for me to say yes to any contract that would be offered. And then growing the crops, I started realizing, of course, that there are more profitable crops than others. I started realizing that some crops I was probably losing money on. And so it really started, like, triggered the conversation on, or just like triggered like a reflection for me, or a thought process, for me to try to figure out, like, okay, what's the right price? Like, for example, this year I started increasing my prices by 10% just to keep up with inflation. And you have to be confident enough in your product to, tell your clients that. So I started looking at my clients individually, the contract that they would offer. Let's say, okay, 5 kilos of beans and 2 kilos of summer squash. And then looking at the price per acre I was able to get from these crops, I realized that if it was under $40,000, I was probably breaking even and making a little bit of money, but not enough for me to like put in the work. So if the contract I get, if my client gives me a contract that's below $40,000 an acre, I will probably be like, well, I can grow this, but I would also like to grow a tomato, and then that brings up the price per acre of the contract. And then I'm able to, like, with each client, get a contract that really makes sense. Instead of looking at the overall farm, it's like, okay, looking at what this individual client is proposing, and then negotiating within that. So I started saying no to contracts and saying no to clients because I felt like I would be losing money with this client, even though I'm making money on the whole farm operation. So it takes some years of experience to get to that point, of course, but it was a really interesting exercise for me to do. I also realized that for an acre of seed production, like one person could probably handle 1 acre to 1.5 acre of contract seed production. And with that information, I'm able to plan how much money I want to make, how many acres I want to plant, how am I going to fill these acres, am I going to have to hire people? Like we all know that finding employees these days is pretty hard. So like I would probably, like for next year, I probably wouldn't want to increase my scale just because I probably wouldn't find anybody to well, I can always find people, but it's one of the challenges, you know. I can't really think ahead because I'm always like, oh, am I gonna have somebody working with me? I for sure cannot do it alone. So yeah, anyways, just a consideration. I think, yeah, but I think for me, like the magic number was realizing that like if I make $30,000 to $40,000 an acre, I'm not making money. So for people that want to get into it, I think starting from this number and then figuring out how you're going to fill this acre so that you're able to make more than that on this acre is probably like a good point to start. Yeah, so I'm gonna stop here, but feel free to ask me all the questions. I seem to do better with questions than just talking to a screen. So yeah, here's my email. If people want to ask questions in private, we can also do that.
One thing I wanted you to talk more about was your experiences here with insurances and exporting to the United States. This is something we've discussed at different points in the year. And yeah, do you want to speak about that?
I can absolutely go ahead and tell you more about my experience with insurance and exporting. I think it actually comes like you, Hugo, you want me to talk about that because I was venting to you at some point during the spring because I had some challenges with my insurance company. I don't want to elaborate too much. It's not the most exciting of topics, but it turns out that I lost my insurance. I don't even know the word, like
Coverage?
civil liability, is that a thing, or responsibility? Anyways, they didn't want to cover me anymore because I was exporting seeds to the United States. And they're like, oh, Americans, they're more prone to sue people, so we don't want to cover you if you're gonna export seeds there. I did some digging and it turns out that they had like some issue with a seed potato lot, but I wasn't gonna start explaining like what the difference is between seed potatoes and vegetable seeds. They're just different, but to them I think they're the same. So anyway, I ended up having to pay twice the amount of insurance this year, and it really put my business model at risk because part of my income or my revenue comes from the United States. It's about 25%, so it's a pretty significant number. But the amount I was having to pay for insurance to cover this, I wasn't making any profit on these sales. So I'm still, in conversation with the insurance company, but it's just something to be aware of. Sometimes, it's good to be honest, but sometimes you don't want to be too honest. I probably shouldn't say that. But yeah, just be aware that it can, your insurance company might not like the fact that you're looking to export to the United States. So that's something to know. I discovered it this year. And yeah.
Thank you so much. It really takes growers to run into these issues for even people like at the Bauta Initiative to be aware about them. So I really appreciate you sharing your experience to some other farmers, so that other farmers don't run into the same mistake. Talking about the United States, we also invited folks from the seed workers organizing. We have Heron and Edmund who are here with us. So they're doing something that's exciting, and they're gonna share about their experience here with us today. Really trying to defend the interests of the work of the seed growers who are behind the seed system and behind the food system we all depend on today. So Edmund, I believe you're going to start us off.
Yeah, that sounds good. It's great to hear about the seed crops you all are growing up there. I'm interested to hear more. So yeah, me and Heron are with Seed Worker Organizing. It's a group that started about a year and a half ago. But let me just introduce myself a little bit and my operation. I'm a seed grower in Virginia, US, and I grow about 2 to 3 acres each year of seed crops and research crops. I've been growing seeds for about 15 years here, and I do contract growing. I started out with contract growing, and I still do contract growing for a small handful of seed companies. I'm also part of a cooperative seed company called Commonwealth Seed Growers. That's pretty small, so I grow for that project as well. And I also do some research and plant breeding crops and seed stewardship projects. So the farm name is Twin Oaks Seed Farm, and the seed company name is Commonwealth Seed Growers. So about seed worker organizing, about a year and a half ago, a little more than a year and a half ago, at the Organic Seed Growers Conference, me and a few other people organized a workshop to talk about contract growing and how to help make it so that more people can make a decent living doing contract seed growing. So looking at prices and sort of like risk, contract terms, just thinking about what we might be able to do to improve our ability to make a living and make it possible for more people to do it. And we had a successful workshop. A lot of people came to it, and from there we kept having calls, and we created a listserv. And so here we are a year and a half later, and we still have a group that's very actively doing stuff. It's, definitely a smaller group than we were initially, but there's also still a listserv that has somewhat broader participation. So the projects that we've been focused on, when we started out, there was an idea that it would be really helpful to have better yield data information so that farmers would know, seed farmers or potential seed farmers would have a better idea of what they needed to charge for seed crops, and of particular varieties, particular types. So there's really that was something that a fair amount of effort went into. And then the other effort was writing a document that would be guidance to seed growers and potential seed growers about how to navigate or negotiate for fair contracts. And the thing that has really stuck and that we've really kept working on is the second project, the contract growing document, and that's what we're here to present about. This document started as I think we envisioned that it was going to be 2 or 3 pages initially. And then we just kept thinking of new elements and things that we thought were important to add to it. And it's something like 15 or 16 pages. So it includes different contract models that are currently used, and discusses the, what kind of risk that gives to the grower. For instance, a common model, the only model that I'd really been familiar with was you agree to grow the seeds and then you get paid a few months after you deliver them. And you get paid by the weight. But there are other models. There's, for instance, a fully guaranteed contract model where you grow the seeds and maybe it's an unfamiliar variety to you, and you just get paid for doing the work regardless of how much yield you get. So just like there's a lot of different options, and Heron is going to talk more about that. And then we got into issues around stock seed risk and stock seed management, and how we get compensated for that. And there's a lot in here. I think I'm going to come back to some of those issues around stock seed, and I think I'm going to pass it to Heron now.
Hi there, everybody. Thanks for coming today. It's a real honor to be here. Thanks to Bauda for bringing us aboard, and also to our 2 other presenters for setting the stage. I spent a couple of decades working in the seed trade, growing at Fedco seeds, for an example, but also did a bunch of different types of consulting for other seed companies along the way, and continue to do that. So I continue to work for and with some other companies, just trying to advise them on how to do things such as contracts. I'm not here speaking for anyone but myself, but also in alliance with Edmund and our other folks. So this document was really interesting. It kind of came about because we were talking about these price issues and how much, seed prices should be. And one of the things I've seen over my time of working in the seed trade is that really good seed growers, or really good farmers, which really is the basis for being a good seed grower, would basically encounter a glitch, crop failure, maybe 1 or 2, and decide that this was not profitable, that they'd make better money doing something such as growing carrots than they would, for market, than they would be growing seed. And as I encountered more and more of these really excellent folks not choosing to grow seed, I personally realized that part of the issue was the contracts. It's not just the seed price, it's also how you're paid and all of the sort of things you inherit from a seed company when they either send you stock seed, or the types of communication, the types of information you receive, to be able to be actually successful. And these are a lot of things you don't know until you get into this work. So when I started working at Fedco, I was 22, and I was saving some seed just because I was a seed grower. I mean, just like a seed saver. But about 5 years later, I realized I really wanted to do more work than what the seed company was doing. And so I started my own operation. And so for the last, this is my 19th season, I have been doing seed production, plant breeding, and seed selection work on the side. I should say on the side, meaning I was working basically 2 jobs. And just a few years ago, I graduated from working full-time in the seed trade to working more than full-time on my farm and working part-time, helping other folks with their stuff. So I realized in that space that basically, I was growing things and realizing that even with a ton of resources, that the contracts themselves have some problems in how people are paid. One of these is something called risk sharing that we've talked about a lot in our group, and we'd love to hear your input as farmers as well as seed growers. And the concept behind this is that both parties need to be sharing equal financial risk, and there needs to be transparency around the details of how to grow those varieties that you're being asked to grow. Seed companies do not always provide, nor sometimes do not have, an accurate roadmap of what kind of populations yield X amount of seeds. So, nor do they sometimes send you viable or true to types crop stock seed. So these things can put a seed grower into basically a setup for failure. So these are many things we don't realize until we've stumbled there. And so the document that we've created is really predicated upon sort of expressing these and creating answers for these. We have not seen in many cases that the seed companies themselves have come up with the answers as seed growers. And then sometimes the person that we're working with as the contract manager does not actually know as much about seed production as those of us who are growing seed, or farming as much as those of us who are farming. So it becomes on our sort of backs to do this work. We've realized that if we want things to be better, we have to inform each other and create a mutual support organization where we can not price fix. What you'll notice about this document is it does not say anything specifically about prices, but frames the context for seed and the challenges that emerge and how to communicate those challenges and how to, as Marie-Claude was saying, create the different relationships both around each variety as well as with each vendor or seller that you're doing business with. One of the things that that I feel also is intrinsic in this, is my own personal opinion, but I know shared by some others, is that when folks have asked why are there not more folks of color growing seed, I also personally reflect that I feel that the contracts themselves lend themselves to the model of balloon payments, which is what Edmund was speaking of, basically absorbing the financial risk the entire length of the crop and getting paid sometimes 9 to 12 months after you've started the crop. Basically lends itself to a certain class status of someone who has access to capital and can maintain that capital. So when we were working with folks from, say, the Ujamaa farming cooperative, they realized that these were not contracts that they could recommend to their Black farmer community because they did not feel that they were remunerative. So what we find is that maybe some of the reasons why the growers who are growing seed are majority white may have something to do with the contracts. So there's some things to analyze, and I know this is a long document. We've sent, we've attempted to synopsize it, and originally we had thought we were going to have a one-page document. But if it was a one-page document, it'd have large fonts that would say, "Don't grow seed for a living." So I'm going to hand it over to Edmund to talk a little more about contract, about stock seed, and other things that are important in this document, and I'll be sharing screen. Thank you.
Thanks, Heron.
So just want to talk a little bit more about some of the nuance and detail in some of the sections here. And one is that we have a section on stock seed, and there's a lot of things about this, but so we'll start out with the idea that you're going to grow seed on contract for a seed company. They're going to send you stock seed, and so we want to recommend that everybody understands that the company providing that stock seed is responsible if there's problems with the stock seed, if there's off types, or if they don't, or if it doesn't germinate. And so just having an idea of what to do if there are problems like that. And then, it gets a little bit more in, there can be more complicated questions related to that. Like, what if you're growing the same seed crop for 2 or 3 different seed companies, and only one of those seed companies is providing the stock seed for the whole grow up? Who is responsible? Who has the, whose risk is it if there's a problem with that stock seed? So there's those kind of questions. But then we also wrote about just questions of the work that we as seed growers might be doing when we're selecting and stewarding varieties and saving stock seed ourselves that can be used for future grow outs. And I've definitely had the experience that some seed companies are enthusiastic to have help doing careful stewarding and selection work, but they don't really have a model of paying for it. And then once once you've got that seed, and you plant it the next year for the crop, there isn't any protocol for who's going to have who assumes the risk if there's a problem with that stock seed that you saved. But you saved it for the seed company's interest, partly for your own interest. So there's just a lot of details and questions here that we dive into. A recommendation for a scenario where you as a grower are really maintaining and stewarding a variety and assuming the risk of potential problems with stock seed is just that seed should be valued more highly and compensated better than seed where the grower isn't doing that kind of work. So, and then I think I want to get into a little bit more. We have a section about seed source transparency and attribution. And the idea here is that we have identified that there's an issue with there's a lot of confusion, especially among seed customers, about where the seed is coming from. And that, there is generally not country of origin labels on seeds. And it can, even seed companies that are, sort of presenting as regional businesses can be doing international sourcing. And that is impacting, that we believe that's impacting growers' ability in the US and Canada to command the prices we need to make a living. So we're looking at that, but we're also, we really want to, we're in favor of international collaboration and networking, and so we want to really present that in a positive light, but also say, let's look at how to make it more clear where the seeds are coming from, so that we can value seed that's produced regionally in regional conditions and things like that. Heron, do you have anything to add to that? I feel like I didn't quite do it justice.
Well, it's just that basically, nobody's really being valued for their seed work worldwide. So how do we acknowledge seed work and acknowledge seed workers all over the world? And also challenge the xenophobia that comes along with that. It's not necessarily that seed being grown elsewhere is it's honestly some amazing great seed growers in all countries. And I think in this situation, it's about acknowledging, for an example, if there's a carrot variety that's from the Northeast, something I call Danvers half wrong, which means it's not actually true to type anymore, that we don't pretend that seed is being grown in the Northeast, that we know where it's being grown both regionally and or country-wise, and that also in many cases there are countries where folks are exporting seed but are not actually being able to provide the seed that their own country needs. There's a lot of different politics involved in the seed supply globally, which pits people from growing things that are their own traditional or cultural or country origin crops, but actually exporting seeds to the United States at like basically prices and in conditions that are not good. There's also the opposite. There's wonderful folks growing good seed at good prices in the world also. So there's been a hesitancy by seed companies to be transparent about where the seed is coming from. And in many cases, for example, a hybrid, if you're a repacker and you buy the hybrid seed, there's oftentimes a country of origin label on the bag. But there's been reaction from folks when those countries have been named. And so companies are hesitant to offer that. And at the same time, are oftentimes hesitant to say if there's been a small scale seed grower growing it and where they're from. So if we take the brave move to be fully transparent about our seed supply, as I know Bauta has done research to discover that so much of the seed in Canada is not from Canada. So these questions and how we frame this for our community and how we re-educate ourselves about what is our seed supply and what we want it to be. So I think that's part of what this document is also. It's not all just what it is today, but it is also what it could be and maybe should be. And we're seeking input from everybody in this document. This isn't a finished document. The intention here is that we're also going to be meeting with seed sellers, hopefully in the next 6 months, to get their perspective about this document and the terms that it frames or the concepts that it frames. So we're looking for input from seed growers, seed sellers, but also seed users, folks that actually plant seed. And I know that we're kind of running out of time, so I just want to frame that we do have monthly meetings. You don't have to, you can join us in this work if you are a seed grower. And we are looking forward to sharing this conversation more in different forums. And I know that coming up this weekend, there's another event in British Columbia that our colleague Craig Boychuk is going to be presenting this same document at in person. So I think we are at our time and ready for questions for all of us. Any last words, Edmund?
Nope.
Thank you so much, everybody, for presenting. And just to finish off with the Seed Workers Organizing Group, as somebody who joined and started coming to their meetings over the last 6 months, they're a great group, and it's not scary to engage with them at all. I'd encourage anybody who's interested to reach out and take part. I think it's amazing work.
This is an evolving conversation, and this is actually the first time that we've shared this document in public and are looking forward to it evolving with many conversations.
Great. So I think we'll just, or correct me if I'm wrong, anybody, but I think we'll just open up the floor to questions, anything about the topics that we've heard, seed contracts or
one question I'm not sure I got an answer was disposez-vous des certifications qui démontrent que les étapes de multiplication de semences ont bien été respectées? Is there any like certification system in the native wildflower seed space?
No, so the entire like seed reg, at least for Canada, it's really focused around cereal crops, seed potatoes, and crops that that belong, pedigree crops that belong to someone, right? So that entire document is focused around genetic uniformity of those crops. So there's no similar parameters for wildflowers because they are such a niche and a novel crop in Canada, at least. The US is a little ahead of us in terms of developing frameworks, but essentially those crops are managed to conserve genetic diversity. So the desire of the legislation we have is about maintaining genetic uniformity for those big agriculture crops. So it really doesn't work across species that you want to have a diverse genetic makeup for, you know, surviving in different environments. So so there's no formal guidelines there. There are a number of less formal recommendations around, you know, sustainable wild collection. So our seed crop to start our crops comes from wild stands. So we follow sustainable wild collection directives. And then we manage the genetics through our own program, which involves introducing new wild genetics every few generations to make sure our crops don't become too domesticated. But it is a really different space when you get into wildflowers.
Yeah, noted. Thanks.
I was just going to say there's some questions from registration. Some of them are pretty broad, so it might just trigger more conversation. You know, one person wrote in just to say, does contract growing make more sense for me than direct marketing seeds? So I'm sure it's going to be hard to answer whether it makes sense for them not knowing who they are, but what is in your your experiences the difference between contact growing and direct marketing?
I could try to answer that a bit because I do both. Um, I'm happy to be doing both, basically. I think that direct marketing is having a platform where the stewardship, the seed stewardship and research work you do can come through to customers is really valuable because it has the potential to help pay for that kind of important work. And it takes a lot to get to the point where that's actually going to help fund you. So in the meantime, doing contract growing and learning, keeping on learning about what you're doing, and you know, I've been doing Commonwealth seed growers for quite a while, and I'm still doing contract growing. And yeah, I'm excited to have a foot in both of those realms.
Great, thanks, Edmund. I think Marie-Claude has a different experience of why she decided not to do retail seed. Do you want to share about that, Marie-Claude?
Yeah, well, of course, it depends. There are multiple things to consider. I would say quickly, profit margin, it's much higher if you do retail. But on the flip side, the amount of work is greater as well throughout the year. It depends if you're looking to want to hire people during the winter, if you're passionate about maintaining inventory and websites, and if you're passionate about shipping seeds, then retail could be interesting. But yeah, I chose wholesale because it allowed me like a down season during the winter. I still work pretty much full time in the winter, but it's not it's not like customer service, it's not shipping seeds, it's not packing seeds. And yeah, so profit margin is, I think for me, is a trade-off for less work and not having to have employees in the winter and not having to maintain a website.
David, I had a follow-up question for Marie-Claude around how are you seeing, what significance does this process that the seed workers organizing is doing in the United States, like how relevant is it for you, who's a contract grower in Canada and Quebec? Can you relate to some of the issues that have been raised by this group?
Oh, absolutely. And just I haven't read the whole 15 pages, excuse me. But yeah, just the issue that Edmund was mentioning about seed stock and when you're growing it for multiple seed companies and who's responsible if there's off types. I mean, that happened to me, and it's like some considerations I have, like every year something. Yep. Every year something pops, something new, like a new issue, and so having the chance to brainstorm with other seed growers who have probably run into these issues is like it's like for me having like a heads up about possible problems that could show up in a couple years, or not problems but just situations. But yeah, totally relevant, and I'm looking forward to having time to read this document. I
just wanted to mention one other model that we haven't talked about, although I guess sort of Edmund has, which is collaboratively launching a seed company. And I also just want to mention the Seed Workers Organizing Group has members in Canada, so it is both the United States and Canada. We're working together. But I don't know, Edmund, if the Commonwealth Seed Growers is open to more members or anything. In Canada, in British Columbia anyway, we have the BC Eco Seed Co-op, which is right now currently there's 20 members and I think about 4 applicants in process. So that's 25 different growers collaboratively selling seed together. So it means that each one of them doesn't have to create their own website. So it's just another model. I just wanted to throw that out there. There is a question here. Colleen asks, they're wondering about standard tests for seed-borne diseases. How do you do seed-borne diseases? How do they factor into seed contracts?
Well, the first place they factor into seed contracts, and this is something that a lot of us growing seed are starting to become more aware of, is stock seed that comes to your farm. So if you are growing seed on contract, the first thing you need to be concerned about is seed coming to your farm from the seed company. Has that been tested? And if that seed has treatment that can be done, such as hot water treatment, to do that.
Yeah.
And to request a certain amount of stock seed to make up for the germination loss in that treatment. So having those conversations, having that clarity with a seed supplier is going to be more and more important, and it will set you in good stead if you can start there. Many of us who started this work did not start there and may either have horror stories or may have lucked out. But there are standard tests. It's by crop. Every crop has different diseases that are common. Some of these you can see while you're growing this crop, and some of them are not as much of an issue. They're there, but they might not infect the seed unless it was a really horrendous crop issue. And then some of them, like viruses, are more of a problem and are harder to see. And these types of diseases are going to become more of an issue and come into play with the costs to do cross-border contracts with the United States back and forth, whether it's stock seed or shipping seed. So those are all things that are necessary to learn about the seed that you are wanting to grow, species or crop by crop. So it's something that when we do this work, we have to educate ourselves. So I can't say there's standards, meaning there's definitely places you send your seed away for testing, but that's kind of how we do it.
Yeah, I do hot water seed treatment for crops where I can, like any nightshade seed that I bring in, I'll do hot water seed treatment because it's just pretty easy. And I think another thing is that in the document is we recommend making it clear that if there's a problem with the stock seed, whether it's true to typeness issues or disease issues, or poor germination, that the company sending that bears the responsibility for it.
I wanted to ask, actually, just Marie-Claude, I don't know if you want to share this, but I know that you yourself have been using some different contract payment models, and I wonder if you might share some of those if you're willing. Sorry to out you or put you on the spot, but I think you are forging pathways. Yes.
But yeah, no, I have no problem sharing it. So I started asking for, is it like not a down payment, but payment in advance. So in my case, I consider that once the seed is harvested, my work is pretty much done, but then there's there can be like a 3-month delay between the harvest of the crop and the payment. And so I consider that once the crop is harvested, even if there's still like some extraction to do, I started asking for a 50% payment. And I think out of the 10 seed companies I have contracts with, I think 3 or 4 have these terms with them. These are like the bigger clients, I would say. That makes a really big difference in the cash flow. Like at this time of year, I'm often like in the credit margin. So having some some income at this time of year is really, I mean, it allows me to make a living of it. And I think it's the way that the retail seed company can, put value on, like, recognize the value of my work as allowing me to, keep doing this work. So so I think for me, the 50% payment at this time of year is like what I would work towards with all my clients.
Thanks, Marie-Claude. If we don't have any other questions, I think there's ways to follow up. So everybody's invited to, who's interested in reaching out to Jenny about Wildflower seed production. Her email address was shared earlier, and we can share it again in the email we sent to all the participants. The Seed Workers Organizing Group has been clearly communicated that they want feedback on their documents, and they have office hours, and they are very open for folks to get involved in the process. There's also a listserv on contract seed growing in Canada. It's not very active, but they're still it's a great way to ask questions and get some information. For sure, if you're looking to grow seeds for companies, now is a good moment to reach out to them and have this conversation. We do in terms of companies, retail companies that are interested in contract seed growing, usually look at some of the biggest local, regional ecological seed companies in your area, and they will probably be interested in bringing you as a contract grower. Thank you again, folks, and be well.
Thanks so much.